This is something that happened a couple of years ago. During this time, I was working a part-time job, and then I was also delivering for Uber Eats to earn extra money. It's a pretty easy thing to do. I live in an area where there's a lot of restaurants as well as people living there, so there's always work in that. But it's not directly in a major city or anything. It's more of a suburb, where some more areas around the town can be busy and others really quiet. I would deliver all over, and I would take any order that I had a chance to get. Sometimes I would get great tips, and other times they would be terrible, but I didn't care that much because it all seemed to even out, at least in my experience. Most of the time I would work at night for obvious reasons. When I worked my other job, it would be during the day, and also there's more food orders at night. Plus, I'm naturally a night owl. There were many times that I would work until like midnight or so. So anyways, on one night in particular, I was working late. At about 10 p.m., I took a delivery order from someone. For the story, I'm just going to say that his name was John M. So I picked up the food, which was from a local restaurant in town. I drove it to the address, which was a little ways out in a much quieter area. I got to the neighborhood and to the address. When I got there, I realized that I had delivered there before. I hadn't really recognized the name, but that's because I do tons of deliveries and I forget them all. I also hadn't remembered the address for the same reason, but I knew that I had been to that house before recently. I couldn't recall if it was the night before or a few nights ago though. I parked at the end of the driveway and then walked up to the front step. When I was walking up, I noticed something. It was a pretty average looking 2-story house, but there was a man in the top floor of the house looking out of the window at me. I couldn't make out much because also all the lights in the house appeared to be off, so I could just tell that there was a guy there. I didn't find it that odd though, as he was probably just seeing that his food was arriving. Neither of us waved or anything, and I had just glanced up and saw him. Then I went to the front step, dropped off the food, and then headed back to my car. As I was walking back, I looked over and saw that the guy was still there. I didn't think much of it though, and went back to my car and then left. Then I went on with more deliveries. As the night went on, it got later. I made a few more deliveries, and now things were starting to quiet down. At 11 something, I decided to take one last order before heading home. So I took one and then realized that it was to the same address as before. But the name was different than before. It was not John M. The food was from a different restaurant too. My thought was that it was weird, but maybe multiple people lived in that house that were ordering. I got to that same house, and when I got out of the car, I saw the same man watching me in the same window again. I did the same thing as before and dropped off the food on the front step. As I was walking back to my car, I looked back again, and the guy was now gone. I got in my car and then was planning to just drive home. Before I drove away though, I saw the garage door open to the house. A car started to back out of it. I began to drive away through this quiet neighborhood. Then I saw the car leave the driveway of that house and pull out onto the road behind me. Soon I realized that the car was following me, because after I got out of the neighborhood and I was back on a busier street, the car did the same thing. When I was halfway home, the car was still behind me. It was like a 15-minute drive back to my apartment. When I got within 5 minutes, I was starting to get really nervous. The same car was still behind me. I couldn't tell for certain, but it looked like the same man might be driving. As I approached my neighborhood, I started to just take random turns. I would turn at a street and then turn again and then turn again. I was turning at just about every chance I got, and I was driving around going nowhere. The car behind me started to make all the turns with me. After about 5 minutes of this though, the car finally stopped following me. I made a few more turns and then stopped seeing the car. So at that point, I went home wondering what had just happened. Somebody from that house followed me home, and it seemed really suspicious. I should have reported it, but I did not. The very next night, I was working again. Once more, I was working late, and it was kind of the same as the night prior. When it was getting late, maybe 10 something p.m., again I got an order that I took. I didn't recognize the address, although I should have. It was a bunch of numbers though, and I made tons of deliveries, so I would instantly forget the addresses. If the street was an actual name and not something like 119th Street, I might have remembered. Plus, the name on the order was different again. It wasn't until I got there that I realized it was the same house. So I got there regretting taking the order. When I got to the house, I didn't see anybody in the window. I carefully left my car and walked up with the food. When I got to the front step, I saw a piece of paper taped on the door. It said, "Please bring food inside," and I saw that the door to the house was cracked open. I obviously was not going to listen to that. I put the food on the front step and literally ran back to my car. I drove away and was not followed. After that, I reported what happened the previous night. Thankfully, I never got another delivery to that address again. I don't use food delivery apps much, but every now and again I do. Last year, I decided to use one because I had a gift card that I somehow got of a few bucks to use on delivery. Like I said, I rarely use the apps, so I didn't really know 100% what I was doing. It had been years since I had used one before. It's easy enough to use the apps, but I didn't know where the delivery driver would go, if they would knock on the door or just leave the food there or what. Plus, I didn't know how much of a tip I was supposed to leave either. I live by myself in a house that I'm renting. The neighborhood is pretty average. I made the order and the app said that somebody was on the way. A while later, there was a knock on the front door and I went over to answer it. When I got there though, I saw a man walking away down my driveway and get back into a car. He drove away and the food was left on my front step and I picked it up and brought it inside. Then I left a tip on the app that I thought was reasonable. The total price of the food was like $15 and I left a $5 tip. I thought that it was fine. Apparently this was not good enough though. About 10 minutes later, there was a loud knock at my front door. It was aggressive and it made me wonder what was going on. When I walked over to the door, I saw the same guy who had made the delivery was there. I opened the door and he angrily told me that I was cheap and I left an awful tip. He was a lot more mad than I would expect. I told him that I thought it was reasonable. He got even more angry and said that it was a slap in the face. He was rambling on and on about how he drove all that way and he needs to make money to pay rent and stuff. I told him I didn't mean to leave a bad tip, I just never used DoorDash, and I didn't know if that was good or bad. The guy cut me off saying that he didn't want to hear my sorry excuses. I offered to give him more money as a tip, but the guy said no, we were way past that now. He said if I wanted to make things right, I had to give him at least $50. I told him no way. He was cursing and rambling on, and I didn't want to deal with him anymore. I had tried to be reasonable, but he was not. I told him to leave me alone, and I went back inside and slammed the door. The guy went after me, and I quickly locked it. He started banging on my door again and then trying to open it. I went around and made sure that every door was locked, and then I covered every window. The man was at the front door for a few minutes and then moved to the back. He went to my back door and then went to multiple windows. I couldn't take it anymore, and I called the cops. The man continued periodically going from one window to a door to another. Then he would move again. He was banging on everything. About 10 minutes later, the cops got there. They talked to the man as well as to me. The guy was complaining to them about the tip and stuff, but I hadn't done anything wrong. Eventually, they got him to leave. I was mad that he didn't seem to get in any trouble. I told the police how the guy was trying to enter my house and was in the backyard and stuff. Apparently, they told the guy if he came back, he could be arrested. So basically, he just got a warning. He was gone though, so I was happy about that at least. Then I moved on and the cops left. However, that wasn't the end of it. About an hour later, the man returned. I heard a loud knock at my door again and looked out of a window to see the guy. He was angrily banging on the front door and trying to open it again. I didn't hesitate and I called the cops telling them that the man was back. Unfortunately, the man didn't stay long this time. He was at the door for only like 5 minutes before leaving. He was gone when the cops got there. They told me that if he came back again to call, and thankfully he didn't return after that. I couldn't believe how crazy that guy was. I reported him to DoorDash and I hope that he isn't allowed to deliver anymore. That guy was totally out of his mind. If he's going to get that mad over a tip and spend that much time trying to get into my house, then he's insane. That's all I can say. The lesson I learned is that I'm never using a delivery app again. I used to work as a delivery driver for Domino's Pizza years ago when I was younger. This is the scariest delivery that I ever had. I remember that I was working late one night, as I often did. Being a Domino's, we were open until midnight every night of the week except for Fridays and Saturdays. On those days, we were open until 2 a.m. So this was a weekend, and it was probably about midnight, and I got a delivery. It had been a busy night to that point, and things had finally begun to slow down just a little bit. I didn't get any second thought and grabbed the order and headed out to my car. The order for this particular customer was 3 large cheese pizzas. They had already paid online, so all I had to do was deliver it and get my tip. I headed out to the address, which was maybe 10 minutes away. I was not familiar with the exact particular area where I was going. When I got out there, I noticed a decent amount of warehouses. It was a quieter part of town and not well lit, and seemed to be a little bit more industrial. I drove down a couple of back roads and then turned into a parking lot that was between two warehouses. There were no cars there, which was weird. It seemed really quiet over there, and I hadn't seen any sign of anybody. I looked around and found the building that the pizza was to be delivered to. It was mostly a typical looking warehouse. It was large and didn't really have any windows. I took the pizzas, walked over to the door, and then knocked on it. At first, there was nothing. It was eerily quiet around there. Then, finally, the door opened. When it did, I saw that it was literally pitch black inside. The only thing I could see in there was just a few feet directly in front of the door on the ground, and that was only from the little bit of moonlight and outside light being let in. I couldn't see anyone or anything at all, just a small amount of the floor in front of me. I was not sure who had opened the door because they were nowhere in sight. I did not want to enter the building though. After about 5 or 10 seconds though, I heard a voice come from inside. It was a woman's voice, and she sounded friendly and casual. She said, "You have the pizza, in here." I was put at ease a little bit upon hearing a friendly voice. I said, "Okay," and started walking inside. I still didn't know why I couldn't see anything though. After going inside, I was now surrounded by darkness and could not see a thing. I didn't know if I was going to bump into someone or something. After taking a few steps, I said, "I can't see anything. Is there a light anywhere?" I was holding the large pizzas with both hands, so I couldn't take out my phone for a flashlight or anything. When I said this though, there was no response. The woman did not speak, and neither did anybody else, if anybody else was there. I assumed there was multiple people for it being a 3 large pizza delivery. That disappointed me that nobody responded. I knew they heard me. Other than that, it was completely silent in there. This was seeming really strange and also sketchy. I slowly took a few more steps in. Then I stopped. I didn't know where on earth I was supposed to go. I said, "Where is everybody?" Still nothing. No response and no answer. After a few seconds of standing there, someone suddenly reached out and grabbed the pizzas from me. As soon as the pizzas were out of my hands, I just turned around and bolted for the door. I ran back and ran into the side wall right next to the door. Thankfully, the door was still open though, and I reached around and found it. Then I left. I ran all the way back to my car and then drove back to Domino's. Sure, I had not gotten a tip, but I was just happy to get out of there alive. I had never been that creeped out before during a delivery. Thankfully, I never had to deliver there again. Sure, it could have just been people working, and maybe the power went out or something, but why was nobody answering me? I don't know what was going on in there, but it really creeped me out. I live by myself in an apartment, and I live on the first floor. It's a pretty average place, but something crazy happened just a few weeks ago. One night, I was at home by myself like normal. I was just hanging out and watching TV as it was maybe 7 o'clock in the evening. Things are usually pretty quiet around the apartment building. I don't have noisy neighbors, and there's not a lot of foot traffic in the hallways. But the building that I live in is fairly large, so there was a knock on my front door and I didn't know who it would be. I got up and walked over to it. When I got there, before opening the door, I looked through the peephole to see who it was. When I did, I saw that there was a man standing there. He was wearing a black and green shirt that said Uber Eats on it. He was also wearing an Uber Eats hat. However, one thing I found strange is that he wasn't holding anything in his hands like food. Also, I hadn't ordered anything. I figured he was at the wrong address. I thought about answering the door and trying to help him find the correct place. But the fact that he didn't seem to have anything with him seemed odd. He stood around the door for a little while longer and looked around. Meanwhile, I watched him through the door. I don't think he knew that I was right there on the other side. He stayed there for a little more time and then walked away. But then I heard him knocking on another door to someone else's apartment nearby. I wasn't sure if he was just an Uber Eats driver who was lost or if something fishy was going on around here. I left the door though and went back into my living room. About an hour later, I left my apartment to go and get food. I did not leave out the front door of the apartment building, but instead I would always leave out of a side door. This is because the parking lot that my car was in was closer to those doors. When I was walking out, I saw the same Uber Eats guy. I could not believe that he was still in the building. When I turned to the corner to go towards the door as I was still in the building, I saw him just kind of standing around there. When he saw me, he turned and quickly walked away down a different hallway. This seemed suspicious. but I kept walking and then left and went to my car. I was gone for maybe 20 minutes. When I got back, I entered the building through the same side door. Then I walked to my apartment, and in that time did not see the guy. I got back home, and about an hour after that, now 9-something p.m., there was another knock on my door. This was really weird. Why was somebody knocking on my door again? I thought that for sure it would not be the same guy. I got up and walked over to the peephole again. Then I looked through it. Not only was the same guy there, but he was wearing something different. Now he had on a police uniform. There's no way that this guy was delivering food for Uber Eats an hour ago and now was working as a cop. I knew he was lying. He stood there knocking on my door again. There was no way I was going to answer it though. Now I knew for sure that he was up to no good. I decided to call the real cops because of the fact that this guy was more than likely impersonating one. I wasn't sure if he would go to the neighbors' doors and knock on them. He seemed to be trying to get people to answer their doors. The guy eventually walked away from my door. When I called the police, I told them the story. About 10 minutes later, an officer showed up at the building. I remember soon after hearing running in the hallway. Like an hour after that, I was told that the guy ran from them, but they caught him. He was already wanted for breaking and entering at a business across town. The guy was definitely up to no good. I'm really glad that I never answered the door for him, and I'm also glad that none of my neighbors did either. I used to work for DoorDash a while back. What that basically is, if anybody doesn't know, is a food delivery app. You can drive around in your car and pick up food at restaurants for people and then deliver it to their house or wherever they want it to go. It's a good way to get extra money. So I've been doing this for a while, and I worked at all kinds of times from morning to night. I also lived in the city, so there were a lot of restaurants and also people living there. That made it easy to always have deliveries to make. One night I was working pretty late. I was in the city and accepted an order from a restaurant. I went and picked up the food, which was a pretty average order. Then I was going to deliver it to the address, which looked like an office building, but I saw in the delivery instructions it said to bring the food to the back alley. Obviously that seemed strange. It also seemed sketchy, but I wasn't scared. I drove there and then parked on the side of the street. I saw the office building, which was fairly tall. It wasn't quite in downtown, but about a mile away. There was indeed a sketchy-looking alleyway next to the building and between another tall building. The alley went back rather far, and it was really dark at this hour. I figured that the guy was probably working in a building there, and it was easier for him to go out into the alleyway. A logical explanation and no reason to be suspicious. So I walked into the alley, and it was empty, dark, and quiet aside from some dumpsters and trash cans. I walked down it looking around. I must have walked a pretty far ways before I saw the guy. There was a back door to a building, and sure enough, a man was standing there. He was in the doorway and waved me over. I walked over and gave him the food, and then he went back inside. Then I turned around and started walking back down the quiet, dark alley. As I was still walking back, I heard footsteps behind me. I tried to ignore it, but I was sort of nervous after hearing them. I turned around and looked, thinking maybe the man went back outside, but there was a different guy there now. He was walking directly behind me, but about 50 feet back, and I'm not sure where he had come from. I kept walking, trying to ignore him. However, the farther I walked, the more it seemed like the guy behind me was gaining on me. I was trying to walk faster and faster without it looking too obvious, but he kept gaining. He was now like 20 feet behind me only. To me, it seemed like there was no denying that he was after me for some reason. The guy had to have practically been running for him to still be gaining ground on me for as fast as I was walking. So then I started running. I began sprinting as fast as I possibly could. When I did, the guy behind me started running too. Thankfully, I'm fairly quick. I ran to the end of the alleyway and then out of it and then for my car. I was able to make it there and get inside. The guy didn't leave the alleyway but remained in it. I drove back home and didn't take any more orders for the night. After that, I did do more work on DoorDash, but never again took an order that requested me to bring it to a dark alley late at night. Looking back, I'm not sure if it was a setup by the guy who made the order or if it was just a coincidence. Either way, I would advise people to avoid going into dark alleys.